NUUage Co-Living is a shared housing solution for older adults who are aging alone on moderate incomes. We're in the startup phase. There are no buildings that exist yet. I got here because I was invited to join a venture studio that was funded by Wells Fargo. And the studio heard of me because I was sounding the alarm on the retirement income crisis, and because I had been writing a book where I interviewed lots of middle income Americans who were experiencing financial vulnerability, and many of them were facing downward mobility for the first time. And it was out of these conversations that I first started to hear about housing and the issue it was, especially for women who were afraid of outliving their savings and were wondering what was going to become of them. Before I talk about NUUage Co-Living specifically, I want to share the story that inspired it, and that's my story. So I'm someone who has all the props and credentials. I have a Harvard MBA, I have a master's in international studies, I have been a C-suite executive, I've been a retail entrepreneur. It was all going well until it wasn't. And during the Great Recession, 2008, 2009, I lost two big consultancies and my income went to zero. Not worried, I had this background and had never had trouble finding work before, but suddenly my phone wasn't ringing. And I was doing all the stuff you do. I was doing the informational interviews and working my network, and I just wasn't getting any traction. So women we talk to other high achieving friends. A friend of mine, she was an Emmy Award winning producer. She's not getting any phone calls returned either. So at some point, at a low point, I wrote an essay describing what it's like to land here. When suddenly the world that you're used to operating in, you're no longer there. It's like you're looking through a glass at a world, at a life that is no longer yours. Well, this essay made its way to the PBS Facebook page. And in 2 days, 10,000 people commented. And it was me too. This is my sister. This is my brother. Why aren't we having this conversation? They also then found my email address. And so what on the comments section were 2 sentences. In the email to me was a 1.5 page single space of these stories. For me, these were like flares going up. And I started speaking and writing about what I was hearing. And Simon & Schuster published my book. And a TEDx talk I did, the TED people elevated it to the main TED stage, and it got 2 million views. So all of this was happening. I'm meeting with people in DC where I live. I'm hearing from them. And the thing that kept coming up was housing, how people were afraid, as I said, particularly women, that they were, as one woman said to me, if I have my housing, I can extreme coupon it the rest of the way. So around this time, I'm starting to see shared living in DC and other cities. But it's always for young people or for nomads. And, you know, I would talk to some of the operators and they would do pizza night once a month. And that was their community building. And I thought, could it be something different? Could it be something that could work for older adults, especially women? Could it address isolation and loneliness? Could it build community? Could it be affordable? So I'm now in the studio and I got resources to hire an architect and to bring on people who really understood shared living and to travel to Amsterdam to the Co-Living conference, etc. And there were sort of four critical trends that sort of determined how we were going to shape this. So the first one was the dramatic rise in people aging alone. So I'm old enough to remember Leave It to Beaver. And that traditional nuclear family right now in the US accounts for only 20% of households. The biggest group is actually people living by themselves. And the second biggest group, so at 28% people living by themselves, the next group is couples without kids at 25%. So we're now living in a country where half the population, half the households are one or two people. And so we know now that a lot of people are going to be aging alone. So when we thought of New Age co-living, I wanted to focus on solo agers. I wanted to focus on the 27 million people who have never been married. They are either divorced or widowed. Some of them may even have children. Because here's the thing. When I was growing up and my grandfather died, my grandmother came to live with our family for 25 years. Nowadays, there's no place to put Nana. Families don't have the money or the room to have the grandmother come and live with them. So among solo agers are people who have adult children who are not in position to help them. In some cases, those parents are still helping those adult children. So that was the group that I wanted to focus on. The second trend was getting our brain around that this forgotten middle is not just some pesky little boomer problem. Boomers, we're just the first up the hill of living longer, but millennials are right behind us, and they don't have pensions either. And Gen Xers don't have a lot of savings either. So this situation of financial precarity is not going away because boomers are aging out. It is in front of us, and it is enormous. Everybody is living longer thanks to advances in science and medicine. If you make it to 60 in reasonably good health, good chance you're going to live well into your 80s, if not later. That's the good news. The bad news is that for middle income Americans, the median retirement savings is $66,000. So wrap your brain around that. And when we think of the housing, because there's no rescue coming, the cavalry is not coming for these middle-class Americans who feel like they've done everything right, used Crest, banned, didn't double park, paid their taxes, but have not managed to set aside the $1 million+ or more that they will need to maintain their standard of living. And with the housing, there's no subsidies. They make too much for the subsidies and can't afford the senior housing options that are available. And there are also more women solo agers than there are men. It's sort of 57, 43%. And because there are more women, then we have more challenge in terms of we make less, but we have longer periods to finance. So what I find in who's been gravitating to us, both on social media and through our marketing, are primarily women. The third market trend that I want to talk about is what I call the aging in place paradox. So you've all seen the studies and the surveys that I've seen that say everybody wants to age in place. I think for adults over 50, it's 75%. When it goes up to over 65, it's 90%. But here's the thing. When you look at our housing stock, only 3.5% of our housing stock has the kind of age-friendly features that would make it both comfortable and safe for older adults to age there. Now we're doing a lot about it. And there are a lot of, sort of initiatives to make this better for older adults. But the truth is, there will be millions of Americans that it will not be practical for them to age in place, to age in their homes. The modifications are too expensive, or the taxes are there, or it's too isolating and too far out in the suburbs. So that because they're saying that's where they want to live, doesn't mean that that's what's actually practical. The fourth thing that we paid attention to is the midlife job disruption. What we know, because of some very good work from the Urban Institute and ProPublica, is that over half of Americans in their 50s are going to lose their jobs. And some fired outright, some jumping before they're pushed. What we also know from that study that they did is that only 10% will ever again get a job commensurate in pay and status with the ones they left. So this means, as we're thinking about new age, there are a lot of people who are in their 60s and 70s who are going to still have to work. So very often the services we think of delivering to older people have to do with sort of the social side and the fun side, or it has to do with transportation, or we're giving them meals. We had lots of great talks this morning about AI. Is there a way that older adults can benefit from AI? Is there a way that we start partnering? This is what we're thinking about, educational institutions for ways to give older adults the opportunity to continue to work. And this again, this is the trend. We know that the 100-year life is upon us. We know that half the 5-year-olds in this country are going to live to 100. And so the things that I'm talking about, I often feel like we sort of look at things in 2-year increments and 3-year increments. I feel like this longevity bonus that is upon us is right up there with climate change as a grand challenge. New Age is just one idea of having older adults who are living together. We imagine that it could be a freestanding building, or it could be, in a superstructure. I've been talking to women. One of the things when they were giving me feedback on this was that we had all of the pods the same. And what they shared is there are friendship groups that are very close, but they don't all have the same financial means. So you got somebody who's living in a $2 million brownstone who's been friends for 20 years with someone who lives outside the city in a rental. They're not all of the same health status either, but they're close, and the idea of living together is appealing to them. So this is getting us to start rethinking whether all the pods have to be exactly the same. And we've been looking at ideas where there are compounds where you could have different kinds of houses around a common center. I want to close by saying that this is one idea. There's a need for many ideas. Whenever I'm in a circle and we start talking about the forgotten middle, all the barriers come up. You know, zoning and regulation barriers, construction cost, you know, and on it goes. That's all true, but this is also what's true. We are at a crossroads where we are uh, on the brink of tent cities of older women. And you're not going to have to read about them, you know, on Perplexity. These are women that in your friendship circle right now, you know women who are starting to go off the rails a little bit financially. Maybe you're not having that conversation. Maybe it's someone in your family, but you see it already at 50. So there's the cost, construction cost, and all of that. But there's also the cost of what we're going to be facing if this housing situation for middle income Americans is not addressed. Both those things are true, and here's what I also think is true. I think in this room right now is actually the answer. I think in this room are people who have the experience, have the network, have the connections, and the people who are not in this room right now who need to be able to contribute to addressing this. There's 6 people in this room who could get them on speed dial, like right now. And we're getting ready to have a new administration. And I think here is an opportunity for 10 people. I don't know this community well enough, but there are 10 people in this room who you know who they are and they know who they are, who could put together what are the barriers legislatively, you know, financially, etc., that prevent us from moving the needle on affordable housing for middle class Americans. I think that uh, what we learned from, I use Claude, Perplexity, and Chat. Nobody has to start with a blank sheet of paper anymore. If there are 10 drafts, you're already on 5 when you start. So I think getting this document and getting it to whichever administration it is, and starting to have the marketing campaign that actually brings this to the public, because there's a lot of concern. I remember interviewing a woman, and she said her 4 children came up to her and asked her mom, "What's your retirement plan?" And she said, "The 4 of you." So there are young people who have an incentive here because they're worried about what happens to their parents, to their mother. And there are old people who are living this and don't see anything happening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth.